Okay, this video we're going to look at a couple of rules that we haven't really paid much attention to or haven't covered in great detail. First one's armed reconnaissance. This is strafing. This is where Allied air units are able to attack bridges and German units without having to use spotters. As you may remember, at night time, if you're doing your firing, you have to have one of your units next to the target acting as a spotter. But if it's daylight, it's up to 3 hexes. But if you're doing Allied air attacks, strafing raids, you don't need to have a spotter at all. Now, what you do when you actually work out your number of armed recon missions, which I've already explained in another video, it depends on how many hit points you've allocated during a previous phase, and it gives you a certain number of raids and it gives, or missions, and it gives you a to hit number. Now, in my case, when I was able to put a certain number of air units in, I ended up with, I've got 4 armed recon missions with a 7 to hit. Now, what you do with this process, if you are going to make an attack, you determine the hit number from the armed recon chart, which we have done, which is 7 for me. Determine if there are any modifiers for terrain or strategic movement. Now, if you're moving along a primary road or a highway, you're counted as having no terrain effects. Otherwise, you're considered to have the terrain effects of the hex you're actually occupying. Right, so that's obviously going to be a negative on your die roll, which is going to make it harder to hit. Now, if a unit is being moved using strategic movement, which enables them to move further in a turn, they're obviously taking less precautions, lesser precaution against air attack. So they're more vulnerable, and that gives you a +1 to your roll. If you've got any flak either in the target hex or adjacent to the target hex, that takes -1 off the die roll, which obviously the aircraft are going to find it more difficult to attack if there's flak units shooting at them. The Allied player then rolls a 10-sided dice and scores a hit if the number rolled is greater or equal to the hit number. Now, there's another thing here as well. If you roll a 0 or 1, that means you lose an air point. And as discussed in a previous video, if you lose more air points than were lost historically, that will affect the overall effectiveness of the Allied interdiction effort. I think you have to lose, just off the top of my head, I think you have to lose at least 20 air points before these modifiers on the attrition and movement sort of penalties take effect. Now, in this particular case, I was looking at this because it's still the Allied combat turn. I was thinking maybe I should attack these German columns coming in over here, but there was no point because they moved at night. They weren't marked with a strategic movement marker, even though they used strategic movement. So I'm going to let them move again, and that will give me that +1 roll, because to be quite honest, a 7 or greater is not an easy. The odds are against me, so I want to get that +1 roll on the dice. So I'm not going to be conducting any attacks at this point in time. Next phase we need to look at is the Allied Mechanised movement phase. This allows units that are mechanised, which are the ones with a yellow sort of oval around their movement to move up to half their movement allowance. Okay, there's something else here, that units that have got their movement allowance in a blue circle are able to move their full movement allowance in the mechanised movement phase. I'm trying to see if I can spot one. I know the 21st Pans have got one somewhere. It's probably hidden now in a stack. I certainly can't see any off the top of my head. Yeah, even the Allies might have one. Oh yeah, the Allies have got one over here. There's one, for example, this Recon unit. That would be able to move its full allowance in the mechanised movement phase. Okay, that's it for quick rules update.